The claim that a new weapon could turn the tide of a conflict or operation is usually one reserved for the World War II documentaries on History Channel. However, the Fokker D.VII may just deserve such a claim, as it became the German fighter of World War I the Entente never had an answer for. By early 1918, the German Air Force, or Luftstreitkräfte, was at a severe disadvantage. Ever since Bloody April, the Entente had been gaining the upper hand in the skies through both numbers and aircraft types. The brand new Bristol Bf-2B, Sopwith Camel, and Spad S-13 were all top-of-the-line fighters, and all part of the British and French Air Forces. Meanwhile, the German Air Force was still flying outdated Albatros aircraft. To make matters worse, the brand new Albatros D.V and Falls D.III had a disappointing performance in the air, and the infamous DR-1 triplane suffered from chronic structure failures and gained a reputation as a difficult airplane to fly. In response to this, Eidflieg, the German bureau that oversaw military aviation, held a flying competition near Aldershof in January 1918. Here, for the very first time, the frontline fighter pilots would fly the submitted aircraft types and vote as to which one they saw as the best. The Fokker Flugzeugwerke would submit the Fokker V-11, an odd-looking biplane designed by Reinhold Plotz. Reinhold had been experimenting with his V series of aircraft since 1916, when he first flew the V-1 biplane. Based on the thick cantilever wings on the Junkers' first all-metal monoplane, the J-1, it had an odd look to it. Eventually, it would evolve into the V-11 and take flight for the first official time at the hands of Manfred von Richtofen. He was not impressed. He made note of its tricky handling, also mentioning that it was unpleasant and directionally unstable in a dive. Not things you want in an airplane, let alone one for fighting. Reinhold immediately went to work, lengthening the rear fuselage by one structural bay and adding a triangular fin in front of the rudder. Richtofen once again took flight in the strange-looking aircraft, and when he landed, immediately praised it as the best aircraft of the competition, even preferring it to his Fokker DR-1. Although it used an outdated Mercedes D3A engine, it still obtained excellent performance and was an easy, safe aircraft to fly. While his recommendation effectively decided the competition, he was far from the only pilot to recommend it. By the time the competition was over, Fokker received an order for 400 of the aircraft, which were then named the D-VII by Eidflieg. Due to Fokker's factories not being up to the task to fulfill the orders in time, be it far too cramped or lack of manpower, the Albatros and AEG factories would end up producing the majority of D-VIIs. This resulted in some compatibility issues, as some parts were not interchangeable in aircraft from different manufacturers. The engine was quickly swapped out for the more powerful Mercedes 3AU, which could get upwards of 200 horsepower as opposed to the 170 horsepower of the originally outfitted Mercedes 3A. In April of 1918, the first Fokker D-VIIs reached the front. It was 7 meters or 22 feet long, had a wingspan of 8.9 meters, nearly 30 feet, and stood at 2.75 meters tall, or 9 feet. With an empty weight of 700 kilograms, 1,543 pounds, it could hold up to 150 kilograms, 330 pounds, worth of pilot, ammo, and fuel, while reaching speeds upwards of 190 kilometers per hour, or 120 miles per hour, and get as high as 22,000 feet and stay in the air for up to 2 hours before running out of fuel. Unfortunately, the Red Baron would never have the chance to fly the airplane he recommended, as he had died in combat only days before. Immediately, the D-VII would prove itself in combat, as Allied pilots would quickly learn to not underestimate the large and unwieldy-looking aircraft. It could outrun and outclimb any Allied fighter, and its wings allowed it to hang on its prop for a few moments before entering a very docile stall. This allowed it to then dive and spray the enemy aircraft below with machine gun fire. By August, the D-VII had racked up an impressive 565 kills. This is even more impressive with the context that only a similar number in total had been delivered to the front around the same time. The few that were shot down and recovered by the Allies were rebuilt with tests done on the airframe and design. The 1919 edition of Jane's All the World's Aircraft notes its divergence from commonly accepted British practice and design, leading to a complete reevaluation of British design theory. The wing shape, full steel tube fuselage construction, and instruts were all unique features that had largely gone unused by the Allied powers during the war. But the advantages they gave to the D-VII proved their usefulness, and the aircraft was well liked by any pilot who flew it. Within the German military, a common phrase about the aircraft quickly arose, stating it could turn a mediocre pilot into a good one, and a good pilot into an ace. Aces such as Erich Lowenhart and Hermann Goering both became very fond of the box-like aircraft, and flew their own until the end of the war in November. By then, around 775 were in service, with a total built being estimated at around 2,000, with many of these not even having seen service yet. Germany would end up having to surrender every single D-VII in its inventory to the Allies, with this aircraft being the only one mentioned by name in the treaty at all. However, many were hidden away, several being flown back to Germany and hidden in sheds. One of which was found in a barn in 1948 and is now on display in the Deutsches Museum in Munich. Anthony Fokker would end up smuggling 6 trains with 60 wagons each full of airplanes and tools back to his home country of Holland, including 120 D-VIIs before starting a brand new company. Here, the history of the D-VII starts to get rather complicated. With the war over, the winning countries and those on the sidelines started grabbing as many D-VIIs as they could. Even France incorporated them into their air force as frontline fighters when the war had ended. But those numbers are mostly gone, with only this picture being able to be found. While 8 D-VIIs had been delivered to Bulgaria in September of 1918, they were forced to surrender them at the end of the war, and that they did, all except for one, which they disguised as a different aircraft by adding an extra seat in the rear. This aircraft was actually used in 1926 to intercept an intruding Yugoslav Brigade 16, which it successfully chased off without a shot being fired. Australia would take a few back as war trophies, all of which were unfortunately lost in a fire in 1925, along with a few other aircraft. Belgium was given around 75 D-VIIs as payment for war damages, some staying within Germany during the Belgian occupation. During the mid-20s, the D-VII fleet was converted into trainers, and by the mid-30s they were fully retired from service and scrapped. Around 10 D-VIIs entered civilian use. Belgium's first registered civilian aircraft was, in fact, a D-VII. One of these civilian aircraft was shipped to Britain in 1938, where it now resides in the Royal Air Force Museum. Canada obtained around 20 for the purpose of studying, mostly from England, who destroyed most of their own examples after a fatal accident occurred. Eventually, Canada preserved 2 D-VIIs, which are now in different museums, with one at the Lac Brome Museum in the village of Knowlton being the most original D-VII in the world. Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Turkey, and the United States all obtained an unknown number of D-VIIs, with one in Denmark having been purchased from Hermann Goering himself, but they were relegated to training aircraft and were mostly put out of service by the mid-20s. Lithuania acquired 5 D-VIIs and built a further 4 from parts, with modifications in order to make small improvements where the pilots wanted them. 3 more with even further modifications were built in 1928, and a further 2 were built using the original model Mercedes engine in 1930. Their fate is unknown, but it's likely they were scrapped after the Soviet occupation in 1939, although the ones built in Lithuania had a poor record, with a couple being involved in fatal crashes. The Netherlands made great use out of the D-VII, even purchasing newly built ones from the transplanted Fokker company after the war. Many were used for scientific expeditions in the Arctic, with others being used as trainers, and still others being used as fighters. The last D-VII was retired from serving in 1937, having served with the Marine branch of the Dutch Air Force. Poland would acquire around 50 D-VIIs between 1919 and 1920 before using them against Russia in the Polish-Bolshevik War. Several were even outfitted with bomber racks and used for ground attacks. Poland would keep the airplane in service until the end of 1926. The Soviets would acquire 50 newly built D-VIIs from Fokker in 1920, and would use them as frontline fighters until around 1930. Their fates are unknown, although more than likely completely scrapped. Switzerland would eventually obtain 27 D-VIIs and heavily upgrade them over the years, using them in a few various squadrons before retiring them in 1938. The Swiss ended up acquiring one of their D-VIIs off of one Karl Hauger, who was being held up by German customs after buying the airplane in Berlin. In response, he decided to simply run, hopping in his aircraft and flying out of Germany as a fugitive before turning the plane over to the Swiss Air Force. Switzerland did end up preserving one of their aircraft, which is now on display in the Flieger Flab Museum in Dubendorf. In 1940, the Fokker company designed and built a custom aircraft based on the D-VII as a sport plane look-alike, known as the Fokker Ontworp 203. It was a gift to Hermann Goering. Not much else is known about the aircraft, and it more than likely has been destroyed due to the Soviet occupation in 1945. The aircraft line that was started by the D-VII would eventually end with the D-17, with only 11 built for the Dutch military. The last one was officially retired in 1940 after Germany occupied the Netherlands. Today there are many flying replicas around the world, and it's possible to build a 7/8 scale kit manufactured by Aerodrome Airplanes. I myself am currently planning to build such a kit and will hopefully be making videos detailing the project soon. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give me feedback, whether that's a like, comment, or subscribe if you haven't already, to keep up with future uploads.